All right, let's get into it. Today we're looking at something that is, by definition, supposed to be final, an execution. We're going to explore what happens when that final act doesn't exactly go to plan.
So let's start with a little thought experiment. I know, it's pretty grim, but just go with me on this for a second. If you found yourself in that impossible situation, what would be the #1 thing you'd want from the process itself?
You'd want it to be over, right? Like immediately. You'd want it to be quick, clean, and as painless as humanly possible. That's the whole idea, at least in theory. It's supposed to be efficient with minimal suffering. But as you're about to see, that's not always how it works out. For the people we're talking about today, that ideal scenario completely fell apart, turning their final moments into an absolute nightmare. Okay, so our first group of stories deals with some of the oldest methods of execution where simple mistakes led to catastrophic, horrifying results. So first up, let's talk about Margaret Pole. She was the Countess of Salisbury, one of the richest women in England. Her big mistake? Being on the wrong side of King Henry VIII. You know, the one with the temper and all the wives. Her son, who was safely out of the country, criticized the king. Henry couldn't get his hands on the son, so he went after his mom instead.
So on the day of her execution, there was a problem. The regular professional executioner wasn't there. The guy that got to replace him was basically a kid, an apprentice who had no idea what he was doing. Instead of one clean strike with the axe, he just panicked. He started hacking at her shoulder, her neck, her back. It was chaos.
In the end, it took 11 separate blows from the axe to finally remove her head. 11! Imagine that! It was so gruesome that it went down in history as one of the most horrifyingly botched executions ever.
Now, if Margaret Pole's death was a failure of skill, this next one is a failure of pure physics. This is Robert Francois Damiens. His crime was that he stabbed King Louis XV, but he did it with a tiny penknife, and the king was wearing so many layers of winter clothes that the wound was barely half an inch deep. The punishment, though, it was wildly out of proportion.
He was sentenced to be drawn and quartered. Now, for anyone who doesn't know what that means, it is exactly as awful as it sounds. They tie each of your arms and legs to a different horse, and then they make the horses run in opposite directions. The idea is to literally rip the person apart.
But there was a problem, a really big one. The horses pulled, and nothing happened. His body just wouldn't give. According to the people who were there, his joints and ligaments were just too strong. The entire execution just stopped.
So, the executioners had to get creative. And by creative, I mean absolutely horrifying. To help the horses, they walked up with knives and started cutting his tendons while he was still alive. After his last limb was finally torn from his body, his torso, which was reportedly still conscious, was thrown onto a bonfire.
But sometimes, the failure has nothing to do with the executioner or the tools. Sometimes the problem is a wild card hidden inside the person's own body.
Which brings us to Thailand in 1979, and the case of Gingal Lorsungarn. She was convicted of kidnapping and murdering a little boy. Their method of execution was by firing squad, but it was unique. The condemned was tied to a cross, and a single shooter fired from behind a screen aiming for the heart.
So the executioner fired, the doctor pronounced her dead, and her body was moved to the morgue. It seemed like everything had gone exactly as planned. Except, it hadn't.
A little while later, workers at the morgue started hearing noises, and when they went to check, they found Gingailu not only alive, but trying to sit up and screaming. She had taken a full round from a firing squad and survived. How is that even possible?
Well, the answer turned out to be an unbelievable biological twist. Ginga had an incredibly rare condition called situs inversions. Basically, all of her internal organs were flipped, like a mirror image. Her stomach was on the right, her liver was on the left, and, most importantly, her heart was on the right side of her chest.
The executioner's aim was perfect. He shot exactly where a person's heart is supposed to be, on the left. But hers just wasn't there. The bullets had missed her heart and all other vital organs completely. After this discovery, she was dragged out of the morgue, tied back to the cross, and shot again until she was finally dead.
And for our last case, we're looking at what happens when human ingenuity tries to create a better, more humane way to execute someone and fails spectacularly on its very first try.
This is William Kemmler.
He murdered his wife with a hatchet and was sentenced to death. But his case was special. Hanging was seen as brutal, so New York had just introduced a brand new invention meant to be more civilized, the electric chair. And William Kemmler was going to be the very first person to test it out.
So on August 6, 1890, they strapped him in and flipped the switch. The first jolt was about 1,000 volts and it lasted for 17 seconds. They turned it off, and the doctors went to check on him. He was unconscious, but he was still breathing. He was still alive. Panicked, they ordered another jolt, this time cranking the voltage up to 2,000. What happened next horrified everyone in the room. His blood vessels burst, his skin started to split, and his body actually caught on fire. The whole thing took 8 agonizing minutes.
This new, humane technology was an absolute catastrophe. The media coverage was brutal. One reporter for the New York Times who was there wrote that, given how horrifically it all went down, the executioner would have done better with an axe.
So, after hearing these stories of hacking, ripping, shooting, and shocking, what's the common thread? What's the takeaway here?
Well, it seems to come down to a few key things. You've got simple human error, like with the inexperienced executioner. You've got equipment that just wasn't up to the task. You've got these 1 in a billion biological flukes that nobody could ever predict. And you have the sheer arrogance of using untested technology on a human being.
And that really brings us to the final question. An execution, above all else, is supposed to be one thing: final, certain, absolute. But these cases show that the process can be shockingly, horrifyingly prone to error. So it leaves you with this thought. If a system that's designed to be completely irreversible is so surprisingly fallible, what does that say about the system itself?